The air in the Moretti mansion always smelled of lemon polish and old money. It was a scent I had known for 15 years, a fragrance that clung to the damask curtains and seeped into the Persian rugs. I was Clara, and this house was my world. Every polished banister, every dust-free mantelpiece, every gleaming window pane was a testament to my silent, diligent care. To the Morettis, I was just part of the furniture, a quiet presence that ensured their lives ran with frictionless ease, and for 15 years, that was enough. My day began before the sun touched the manicured lawns of the estate. I'd walk the silent, cavernous halls, my soft-soled shoes making no sound on the Italian marble. My first task was always to check the grand foyer. This morning, a single wilting petal had fallen from the enormous bouquet of white lilies on the central table. I plucked it away, my fingers moving with practiced precision. Perfection was the standard. Anything less was a failure, a crack in the pristine facade Helena Moretti worked so tirelessly to maintain. Helena, the matriarch. A woman carved from ice and entitlement. She moved through her own home as if she were a visiting queen, her eyes sweeping over surfaces, not to admire them but to find fault. Her voice, a low, melodic purr when addressing her wealthy friends, could turn sharp and brittle as breaking glass when she spoke to me. Clara, she called that morning. I was in the dining room, ensuring the silver was aligned to the millimeter for breakfast. I turned, my hands clasped behind my back. Yes, Mrs. Moretti. She stood in the doorway, a silk robe the color of champagne draped over her slender frame. She gestured vaguely at the windows. There's a smudge on the lower pane of the east window. The morning sun is hitting it directly. It's distracting. I had cleaned those windows myself yesterday. I knew for a fact there was no smudge. But arguing was not my place. Arguing would be an act of insubordination, an unforgivable disruption of the established order. Of course, Mrs. Moretti. I will attend to it immediately. She gave a curt nod, her gaze already drifting away, my existence forgotten as quickly as it had been acknowledged. That was the nature of our relationship. I was a tool to be used, a problem solver who was herself invisible. Her husband, Arthur Moretti, was a different creature entirely. He was a ghost in his own home, a man who had retreated into his library years ago, and seemed to have misplaced the key to the door. He was kind in a distant, passive way. He'd sometimes offer me a soft "Good morning, Clara," his eyes filled with a weary sadness, as if he were apologizing for the entire world, including his wife's behavior. But he never intervened. He was a ship that had long ago surrendered to the tide, and Helena was the relentless current that guided him. Then there were the children, now adults but forever trapped in the gilded cage of their upbringing. Richard, the heir apparent, was a carbon copy of his mother, arrogant, dismissive, and utterly convinced of his own importance. He treated the staff as if they were malfunctioning appliances. Isabella, the daughter, was quieter, her eyes holding a flicker of empathy that had somehow survived the suffocating atmosphere of the house. She would occasionally offer me a shy smile or a quiet "thank you," small gestures of kindness that felt like finding a wild flower growing in a concrete sidewalk. But the only true ally I had within those walls was James, the butler. James, with his ramrod-straight posture and face as impassive as a stone sentinel. He had been with the family even longer than I had. He saw everything, heard everything, and said almost nothing, but in the silent language of the household, he and I were fluent. A shared glance across a crowded room, a discreet nod in a hallway, the way he'd ensure a fresh cup of tea was waiting for me after a particularly grueling dressing down from Helena. These were the threads of our alliance. He knew, as I did, that the Morettis' immaculate world was built on a foundation of secrets and silent sacrifices. The biggest event of the year, the annual Moretti Foundation Gala, was in 2 days. It was Helena's crowning achievement, a night where she could perform her role as society queen for an audience of the city's most influential figures. For the staff, it was a finely choreographed ballet of frantic behind-the-scenes work. The mansion had to be more than perfect. It had to be a living, breathing advertisement for the Moretti legacy. This year felt different. The tension in the house was thicker, more pronounced. I had overheard snippets of hushed, strained phone calls Helena took in her study. Words like over-leveraged and final notice had drifted through the heavy oak door. Arthur seemed more withdrawn than ever, his face etched with lines of worry he tried to hide behind his leather-bound books. They were putting on a brave face, pouring the last of their resources into this gala, to maintain the illusion of untouchable wealth. The performance was everything. That afternoon, I was polishing the silver frame of a family portrait in the main hall. It depicted a younger, happier-looking Moretti family. Helena was beaming. Arthur had a genuine smile, and the children were still children, unburdened by the weight of their name. Helena walked past, trailing a cloud of expensive French perfume. She paused and looked at the portrait, then at me. "That was a better time," she said, her voice unusually soft. For a fleeting second, I saw a crack in her icy armor, a hint of vulnerability. Then, as if catching herself, her expression hardened. She looked at my hands, diligently rubbing the silver. "Make sure you use a separate cloth for the woodwork. Your fingerprints are all over the place. We must be flawless for the gala. Our reputation depends on it." I simply nodded. "Yes, Mrs. Moretti." Later that evening, as the house fell silent, I met James in the pantry. He was counting the wine bottles, his brow furrowed in concentration. "She's more on edge than usual," I said quietly, polishing a wineglass until it squeaked. James didn't look up. "The lions are always most dangerous when they're hungry, Clara, and the Morettis are starving." He slid a bottle of prized Chateau Margaux into its rack. "The caterers confirmed their final numbers. The florist will arrive at dawn. Everything is proceeding as planned." His use of "as planned" held a double meaning only we understood. He paused and finally met my gaze, his eyes clear and steady. "Are you certain about this? There is still time to reconsider." I looked out the small pantry window at the vast, dark estate. The moonlight silvered the leaves of the ancient oak trees that stood like silent sentinels on the lawn. This house, this land, it held 15 years of my life. It had witnessed my silent endurance, my quiet dignity in the face of relentless condescension. It wasn't about revenge. Not entirely. It was about balance. It was about the truth finally finding its own voice. I placed the sparkling glass on the shelf. "I've never been more certain in my life, James." He gave a single solemn nod. "Very well. Then let the performance begin." The morning of the gala, the mansion was a whirlwind of controlled chaos. Florists swarmed the entrance hall, creating breathtaking arrangements of peonies and hydrangeas. Caterers clattered in the kitchen, the air filling with the scent of roasting herbs and baking bread. I moved through it all like a ghost, a director ensuring every scene was set to perfection. I was adjusting a centerpiece in the ballroom when Richard Moretti swaggered in, talking loudly on his phone. He gestured impatiently, for me to move out of his way without so much as a glance in my direction. As I stepped aside, he brushed past, knocking a vase of orchids. It teetered precariously. I shot out a hand and steadied it just before it could fall and shatter. He ended his call, and finally looked at me, not with gratitude, but with annoyance. "Watch what you're doing," he snapped, before turning and walking away. I stood there for a long moment, my hand still on the cool ceramic of the vase. I was invisible, a non-entity, a function rather than a person. The years of quiet slights, the thousands of tiny cuts to my dignity, coalesced into a single cold point of resolve in my chest. The lions weren't just hungry, they were blind. And tonight, I was going to help them see. I took a deep, steadying breath. The stage was set, the audience was arriving, and I knew my lines perfectly. The name on the lawyer's letter was Silas Blackwood. It meant nothing to me. For 3 days the thick cream-colored envelope sat on the small dresser in my modest staff quarters unopened. I assumed it was a mistake, a piece of junk mail that had somehow found its way into the Moretti estate's postbag and been passed to me by a junior maid, Silas Blackwood. The name was a stranger's. My life was one of routine and discipline. There was no room for mysterious letters. My world was circumscribed by the mansion's walls, my history defined by my service within them. I had come to the Morettis at 25, a young woman with no family to speak of, seeking stability. I found it, but at the cost of my own identity. I became Clara the housekeeper. The woman I was before, the girl who loved to read classic literature and dream of traveling the world, had faded into a sepia-toned memory. On the fourth day, curiosity finally won. I sat on the edge of my bed, the springs groaning softly, and carefully slit the envelope open. The letterhead was from a prestigious law firm in Boston, Dewitt, Harding and Finch. The letter was formal, dense with legal terminology, but the message was starkly, unbelievably clear. A Mr. Silas Blackwood, my maternal grandmother's estranged brother, my great-uncle, had passed away. I vaguely recalled my mother mentioning a reclusive, eccentric uncle who had vanished from the family decades ago, after a bitter dispute. I had never met him. I didn't even know he was still alive, and he had left his entire estate to me. I had to read the sentence 5 times before it began to penetrate the fog of my disbelief. The letter listed assets, stocks, bonds, a portfolio of real estate in New York, and a liquid cash sum that made my head swim. The number had so many zeros it looked like a typo. I felt a wave of vertigo, my small, simple room seeming to tilt on its axis. My first call was to the law firm. A kind, patient man named Mr. Harding confirmed it all. Mr. Blackwood was a very private man, he explained, his voice calm and professional. But he followed your life from a distance. He never had children of his own. He told me he admired your fortitude, your quiet strength. He said you were the only one in the family who wasn't grasping. He wanted his legacy to be in the hands of someone who understood the value of hard work, not just the privilege of a name, fortitude. He had seen fortitude, where others like Helena saw only servitude. A tear I didn't know was there slid down my cheek and splashed onto the letter. It wasn't a tear of joy for the money, but of gratitude for being seen. For the first time in decades, someone had looked past the uniform and seen the woman wearing it. The next few months were a blur of clandestine activity. I took a few personal days, a rare occurrence that earned a suspicious glare from Helena, and traveled to Boston to meet with Mr. Harding. I was a different person there. I wore simple, tasteful clothes I'd bought for the trip, and people addressed me as Miss Vance. I signed papers, made decisions about portfolios, and learned the dizzying scope of my new reality. The fortune was real. It was mine. My first instinct was to walk out of the Moretti mansion, to leave the scent of lemon polish and condescension behind me forever. I could buy a villa in Tuscany, a penthouse in Paris. I could finally read all the books I wanted and see the world I had only dreamed about. But something held me back. Leaving felt too simple, too easy. It felt like running away. 15 years of my life were invested in that house. I had polished its floors, mended its curtains, and absorbed its secrets into my very bones. And I knew its deepest, most current secret: the Morettis were drowning. I had seen the signs for over a year. The old money was nearly gone, squandered by a few bad investments by Arthur's father and Richard's reckless spending. Helena's lavish lifestyle was a performance financed by debt. They were house-rich and cash-poor, their entire identity tied up in an estate they could no longer afford to maintain. One evening, I was clearing the dinner table when I heard Helena and Arthur arguing in the study, their voices sharp whispers that carried through the door. "We can't sell the paintings, Arthur. What would people say?" Helena's voice was laced with panic. "What choice do we have, Helena? The bank won't extend another line of credit. We're out of options. We might have to sell the house." Arthur's voice was heavy with defeat. "Never," she hissed. "I would rather die than suffer that humiliation. This house is who we are. That's when the idea began to form. It was audacious, even mad, but it took root in my mind and refused to be dislodged. It wasn't about revenge, not then. It was about a strange, ironic form of justice. Helena believed the house was everything. She would see that the foundation she stood upon was not as solid as she thought. Through my lawyers, I set up a shell corporation, a neutrally named entity called Northwood Holdings Group. It was completely anonymous, its ownership structure a maze of legal firewalls. A few weeks later, Mr. Harding informed me that, as I had suspected, a discreet, off-market inquiry had been made about the sale of the Moretti estate. Their financial desperation was critical. Through Northwood Holdings, I made an offer. A very generous one, enough to clear their debts and leave them with a substantial cushion, on one condition: a non-disclosure agreement and a leaseback option. They could continue to live in the house as long as they wished, paying a nominal rent to the new, anonymous corporate owner. To them it must have seemed like a miracle. A faceless corporation had saved them from ruin and public shame, allowing them to keep up appearances. They would never suspect the truth. The sale was finalized in a matter of weeks. The documents were signed. One day I was the housekeeper of the Moretti mansion, the next I was its owner. Nothing changed, and yet, everything had. The air smelled the same. Helena's commands were just as sharp. But now, when I polished the silver, I was polishing my silver. When I walked the halls, I was walking my halls. The feeling was a heady, secret power. The only person I told was James. I had to. I needed his help. And more than that, I needed a confidant. I trusted him implicitly. One night, in the quiet of the library after the family had retired, I laid it all out for him. I showed him a copy of the deed, the name Northwood Holdings Group, listed as the owner, and then a document confirming me as the sole director of Northwood. He stared at the papers for a full minute, his face a mask of professional calm. He then slowly raised his eyes to meet mine. I expected shock, disbelief. Instead, I saw a slow, subtle smile touch the corners of his mouth. "Well, I'll be," he breathed, a rare crack in his formal demeanor. "Clara, of all the things I have witnessed in this house, this is the most remarkable." He wasn't angry or judgmental. He was impressed. He understood the profound poetic justice of it all. "Helena's pride is the only thing she has left," he said, his voice low. "It's a dangerous thing. She will wield it like a weapon at the gala. She needs to feel powerful, and she will do it by making others feel small." "I know," I said, "and I'm going to let her." That's when the plan for the gala was born. It was James's idea, really. He suggested the timing, the method of delivery. It had to be public. It had to be at the moment of her highest triumph. To make the fall that much greater. This was no longer just about justice. The years of quiet humiliation had curdled into a desire for a reckoning. I wanted her to feel, just for a moment, what it was like to have your world stripped away from you in front of an audience. James became my co-conspirator. He had a duplicate set of the final property documents sent from my lawyer, enclosed in an elegant leather-bound folder. We hid it in his pantry, ready for the night. In the days leading up to the gala, I watched the Morettis with new eyes. I saw the desperate fear behind Helena's arrogance. I saw the hollow resignation in Arthur's face. They were actors in a play, and they didn't even know that I now owned the theater, the stage, and the script. The final act was about to begin, and I was the only one who knew how it would end. The ballroom was a galaxy of glittering diamonds and counterfeit smiles. Chandeliers rained down a warm, golden light on the city's elite, who moved through the room in a sea of silks and tuxedos. The air hummed with polite chatter and the clinking of champagne glasses, a symphony of privilege. From my position near the service entrance, I watched the performance with a strange sense of detachment. I had set this stage, fluffed every cushion, approved every floral arrangement. I was the architect of the evening, yet to every person here, I was less than a shadow. Helena Moretti was in her element. She glided through the crowd, a vision in an emerald green gown, her laughter echoing like perfectly tuned bells. She was holding court, accepting compliments on my house, basking in the glow of a legacy she no longer owned. Arthur stood by her side, a handsome but empty prop, smiling on cue. Richard was preening near the bar, trying to impress the daughter of a tech billionaire, while Isabella lingered near the French doors, looking as though she'd rather be anywhere else. James moved with his usual silent efficiency, directing the catering staff, ensuring every glass was filled, his face an impassive mask. But every so often, his eyes would meet mine across the crowded room, a silent, steady acknowledgement. The folder was ready. The moment was approaching. As the main course was cleared, Arthur tapped a knife against his glass, calling for silence. It was time for the speeches. He gave a brief, unremarkable toast, thanking everyone for supporting their foundation. Then he handed the floor to his wife. Helena took the center of the room, her posture regal. A hush fell over the guests. This was her moment, the pinnacle of her year. "My dearest friends, my family," she began, her voice resonating with false warmth. "Looking out at all of you here in the home that has been the heart of the Moretti family for generations, I am filled with such immense gratitude." She spoke of tradition, of legacy, of the importance of upholding standards in a world that was constantly changing. Her eyes swept the room, and for a terrifying second, they landed on me. I was standing by the main doorway, ready to assist a guest if needed. A slow, cruel smile spread across her lips. She had found her prop. "Our legacy isn't just about bricks and mortar, or the art on these walls," she continued, her gaze locked on me. "It's about the people who uphold it. It's about understanding one's place in the grand scheme of things. Even the most humble roles are vital to the whole." The air grew thick with tension. The guests shifted uncomfortably. They knew she was talking about me. This was no longer a speech. It was a public execution. "Take our housekeeper Clara," Helena said, gesturing dismissively in my direction. "For 15 years she has worked here. She ensures our home is perfect, our lives are orderly, a simple but necessary function." She paused, letting the condescension hang in the air. "Some people might look down on such a life, but we believe in charity. We give her a home, a purpose. She should be grateful for her position. After all, without us, what would she be? She is, when you strip it all away, just a servant, a collective intake of breath." The words, so casually cruel, landed like stones in the silent room. I could feel dozens of pairs of eyes on me. Some pitiful, some scornful, some embarrassed. Richard smirked into his glass. Isabella looked horrified, her face pale. Arthur stared at his shoes, a monument to inaction. I did not flinch. I did not look away. I held Helena's gaze, and slowly, deliberately, I allowed a small, calm smile to touch my lips. My reaction confused her. She had expected tears, shame, a bowed head. She had not expected serene confidence. My smile unnerved her, broke her rhythm. Her own smile faltered for a fraction of a second, and in that moment of hesitation, James began to move. He emerged from the shadows of the dining hall entrance, walking not with the hurried pace of a servant, but with the measured, deliberate stride of a man on a vital mission. In his white-gloved hands, he carried a slim black leather folder. He didn't look at me. He walked directly toward the center of the room, his path bisecting the space between Helena and her guests. The crowd parted for him instinctively. He stopped directly in front of Helena, who stared at him, bewildered. "What is it, James?" she snapped, her voice tight with irritation at the interruption. James did not answer. With a movement of pure, practiced elegance, he bowed slightly, and held out the folder. "What is this?" she demanded, her eyes darting from the folder to his impassive face. "The new household accounts, madam," James said, his voice perfectly level, yet carrying to every corner of the silent ballroom. The owner felt you should be made aware of them immediately. Owner, the word hung in the air. Helena snatched the folder from his hands, her knuckles white. She fumbled with the clasp, her arrogance momentarily replaced by a flicker of unease. She opened it. Inside was not a budget report, but a set of legally certified property documents. I watched her face as she scanned the first page. I could see the exact moment her brain processed the legal language. I saw the flash of confusion as she read the name of the purchasing entity, Northwood Holdings Group. She flipped the page, and then the next one, which detailed the directorship of the corporation. There, in stark black ink, was my name, Clara Vance. Her face went slack, the color drained from her cheeks, leaving behind a pasty gray mask of disbelief. Her eyes, wide with horror, darted from the paper in her hands up to me, standing silently by the door. The connection was made. The impossible, unthinkable truth crashed down upon her. The champagne glass she was holding slipped from her nerveless fingers. It did not shatter. It hit the thick Persian rug with a soft, dull thud that was louder than a gunshot in the dead-still room. A wave of whispers erupted from the guests. What is it? What does it say? Helena looked around, her mouth opening and closing like a fish, but no sound came out. Her entire world, the foundation of her identity, had just been turned to dust by a single piece of paper. I finally broke the silence. I took one step forward, my voice not loud, but clear and steady, cutting through the murmurs like a blade. Helena, I said, and the use of her first name, without a title, was a shock in itself. You are mistaken. You are not my employer. I am your landlord. A collective gasp went through the crowd. This house, I continued, my voice calm, my gaze unwavering, the art on the walls, the ground beneath your feet, it is all mine. You have been living here, for the past 6 months, as my tenants, and I must say, your behavior as a tenant, publicly humiliating a guest in your dedi, in my home, is deeply disappointing. Her face crumpled, the carefully constructed mask of the proud matriarch shattered into a million pieces, revealing the terrified, pathetic woman underneath. The humiliation she had tried to inflict on me had been returned to her 1,000-fold. I looked from her broken expression to the stunned faces of her family. Arthur looked as though he'd been struck by lightning. Richard's jaw was hanging open. Isabella, however, was looking at me with an expression of pure, unadulterated awe. The gala was over. The performance had reached its stunning conclusion, and as the guests began to murmur and move toward the exits, desperate to escape the scene of the social carnage, I stood tall in the doorway of my house, no longer a servant, but the master of the stage. The silence that followed the mass exodus of guests was more profound than any noise. It was a heavy, suffocating blanket, filled with the ghosts of shocked whispers and the lingering scent of Helena's failure. The Moretti family stood frozen in the middle of the ballroom, a tableau of ruin amidst the wilting flowers and half-empty glasses. Helena was the first to break. A strangled sob escaped her lips, a sound of pure, unadulterated rage, not sorrow. "How dare you?" she finally choked out, her voice a venomous rasp. She took a stumbling step toward me, her face contorted in a mask of fury. You servant. This is a trick, a forgery. It's all perfectly legal, I assure you," I said, my voice remaining calm. James had moved to stand a respectful distance behind me, a silent pillar of support. My lawyers at Dewitt, Harding and Finch are exceptionally thorough. The name of the prestigious firm seemed to suck the remaining fight out of her. She knew that name. Everyone did. It was unimpeachable. The fight drained from her posture, replaced by a trembling, desperate confusion. Arthur finally found his voice. He looked at me, his face pale and haggard. "Clara, is this true? All of it?" "Yes, Mr. Moretti," I replied. The title a courtesy I offered him, but not her. "Your family was in severe financial distress. the estate was put up for a private sale. My corporation bought it. The arrangement allowed you to clear your debts and remain in the house to avoid public embarrassment. It was meant to be a discreet, and I hoped, a dignified solution. Dignified? Helena shrieked. You call this dignity? Humiliating me in front of everyone we know. You chose the time and place for this reveal, Helena, not I said, my voice hardening slightly. You chose to make a public spectacle of your cruelty. You wanted to remind a servant of her place. I simply provided you with a more accurate assessment of what that place is. You are a tenant in my home. Richard, who had been silent until now, finally exploded. This is insane. You're nobody. You're the help. We'll sue you. Will. His voice trailed off as the futility of his words dawned on him. They had no money, no power, no leverage. He was just a boy playing at being a king, who had just discovered his castle was made of sand. Only Isabella said nothing. She looked from her mother's rage to her father's despair, and then her eyes settled on me. There was no anger in her gaze, only a complex mix of shock and a dawning, reluctant respect. The next morning, I requested a meeting with the family in the library. My library. I sat not in a corner, waiting to be summoned, but in one of the high-backed leather armchairs beside the fireplace. James served coffee, the familiar ritual, now imbued with a revolutionary new meaning. The Morettis filed in, looking tired and defeated. Helena's eyes were puffy, her face stripped of makeup and pride. Arthur looked like he had aged a decade overnight. Richard slumped in a chair, sullen and resentful. I did not ask you here to gloat, I began, my voice even. I asked you here to discuss the terms of your future. You have two choices. I let the words hang in the air. First, you can leave. I will give you 30 days to vacate the premises and find another place to live. The funds from the sale are yours, so you are not destitute. You can start over, somewhere else. Helena's head snapped up. And be driven from our home by the staff? Never. The second option, I continued, ignoring her, is that you can stay. You can continue to live in this house, but not as masters, as tenants. Rent will be formally established, and due on the first of every month. It will be a fair market rate. Furthermore, you will treat every member of the staff, including myself, with the respect due to any human being. The condescension, the dismissiveness, the cruelty, it ends today. If you choose to stay, you will stay on my terms. A heavy silence filled the room. Arthur stared into his coffee cup, as if it held the answers to the universe. Richard scoffed but didn't have the courage to say anything. Helena laughed, a bitter, broken sound. You expect me to live in my own home and pay rent to my housekeeper. You are insane. It is no longer your home, Helena. That is the truth you must accept, I said simply. Then we will leave, she declared, standing up abruptly. I will not suffer this indignity. She looked at her husband and son. Arthur. Richard, we are leaving. Richard stood, eager to follow his mother's lead. But Arthur did not move. He looked at his wife, and for the first time since I had known him, I saw something other than weary resignation in his eyes. I saw a spark of defiance. No, he said, his voice quiet but firm. Helena stared at him. What did you say? I said no, Arthur repeated, standing up to face her. You will leave, Helena. I will not. For 20 years I have lived in your shadow, enabling your cruelty with my silence. I have watched you belittle good people. I watched you try to destroy Clara last night, simply to soothe your own ego. I am done. The money from the sale, you can have my share. Go, be the queen of some other castle. My life here, under this roof, has been a prison. Perhaps now, perhaps it can be a home. The final betrayal from her own husband was too much. Helena looked as if he had physically struck her. Without another word, she turned and swept out of the room, a whirlwind of shattered pride. Richard hesitated, looked at his father, then at me, and with a final resentful glare, followed his mother. That left Arthur, Isabella, and me in the library. Arthur turned to me, his shoulders slumped, but his eyes clear. Clara, Miss Vance. I am so deeply, profoundly sorry. For everything. For my weakness, for what you endured in this house, because of me and my wife. Thank you, Arthur, I said softly. Isabella stepped forward. My father is right, we were blind. What you did, it was incredible. She looked around the room. I would like to stay, if you'll have us. I'm willing to accept your terms. And so a new foundation was laid. Helena and Richard left within the week, moving into a modern sterile condominium downtown, their departure marking the end of an era. Arthur and Isabella stayed, the atmosphere in the mansion transformed. The oppressive tension lifted, replaced by a quiet, respectful peace. Arthur began to emerge from his library, taking an interest in the gardens, speaking with the staff, a man slowly coming back to life. Isabella and I formed a tentative, surprising bond. We would have tea in the afternoons, and she would ask me about my life, the real one, the one before the Morettis. She was learning to see people for who they were, not what they were. A few weeks later, I was in my office, the room that was once Helena's personal study, reviewing the estate's accounts. James entered with a tray. He placed a cup of my favorite Earl Grey tea on the desk. The house feels lighter, Miss Vance, he said, a rare, genuine smile on his face. Please, James, I said, looking up at my old friend and ally. After all we've been through, call me Clara, he nodded, the smile widening. Clara, then. I looked out the large window at the sprawling lawns, the ancient trees, the land that was now mine. I had not sought out wealth or power, but it had found me, and with it I had not wrought vengeance, but balance. The gilded cage was broken, its doors thrown wide open, and for the first time, the air in the Moretti mansion smelled not of lemon polish and secrets, but of freedom.